Tuesday, July 1, 1952. The New York Times by Emanuel Perlmutter. Fire sweeping the Brooklyn waterfront. 1 dead, 46 hurt, 42 homeless in a $1 million Brooklyn fire. A spectacular fire yesterday morning in the Greenpoint district of Brooklyn resulted in 1 death, injury to 46 firemen and civilians, and property loss estimated at $1 million. 4 of the firemen were taken to Greenpoint Hospital suffering from smoke poisoning and minor hurts. It was the biggest and most costly fire here in recent years. 400 persons were temporarily evacuated from their homes. 42 were permanently burned out of their dwellings. 15 factory buildings and frame tenements in a 4-block area adjacent to the juncture of Newtown Creek and the East River were either destroyed or damaged by the blaze. They occupied a triangle bounded by Manhattan Avenue and Box, Clay, and Commercial Streets, at a point bordering on the Vernon Avenue Bridge to Long Island City, Queens. Fire starts in warehouse. The fire started in a 2-story brick building at 1119 Manhattan Avenue, used as a warehouse by Champagne, Citron, and Clark, paper box manufacturer. 5 million boxes valued at $250,000 went up in flames. The building, which comprises 130,000 square feet on Manhattan Avenue and Box Street, was built in 1896 and served until recently as a trolley car barn for the Board of Transportation. A spokesman for the company, after re-examining the general fire scene last night, said he believed the loss estimate of $1 million was far too low. He said the losses might aggregate between $2 million or even $3 million. The man who perished in the blaze was Walter Roble, 60 years old, of 1134 Manhattan Avenue, watchman for the warehouse. He entered the building at 8:30 a.m., 10 minutes before the fire began, and never came out. 9 workers who were in the building escaped without hurt. The origin of the fire was undetermined last night. Firemen were still wetting it down. 250 firemen fought the flames. Most of them arrived on 5 alarms from Brooklyn. 3 additional alarms sounded from a box at Clinton and Delancey Streets, brought Manhattan firemen. Apparatus from Queens was moved into Brooklyn to replace companies sent to the fire. Strong wind fans flames. The firemen were hindered by a strong northeast wind, which fanned the blaze and scattered the sparks that ignited the adjoining buildings. Huge clouds of black smoke rolled over the area and were visible from the towers of Manhattan and from points in Long Island and Westchester. Fear and hysteria gripped the neighborhood. 5 women were treated for shock in a store at 1102 Manhattan Avenue that was converted to a first aid station. 18 families fled from 7 tenements between 38 and 52 Clay Street, racing through backyards to DuPont Street. The tenements were wrecked by the flames. Spectators shuddered as first the roof and then the sides of the paper box warehouse buckled and then collapsed under the twin assault of the flames and the tons of water directed against it. The collapse of the building caused an electric light pole across the street to incline precariously. Workmen righted it. Spray from hoses soaked onlookers and firemen, and the acrid smoke caused eyes to water and made breathing labored. A score of the firemen who were treated in an emergency hospital at 45 DuPont Street received oxygen from inhalators. The men of Engine 216 from 11 Scholes Street, Brooklyn, who arrived on the 3rd alarm, had a hard time of it. They brought their engine into Clay Street, near the rear of the warehouse, and fought the fire at close range. The heat of the flames was so intense that it scorched the paint from the engine and cracked its windshield. 9 companies whose elimination as an economy measure was recommended by the Mayor's Committee on Management Survey took part in the firefighting. 6 came from Manhattan and 3 from Brooklyn. 45 pieces of fire apparatus. 45 pieces of apparatus were at the fire, including the fireboat John Perroy Mitchell, which docked at Commercial Street and pumped water from the East River to feed hoses. A police emergency truck, 2 ambulances from Greenpoint Hospital, electric, gas company, telephone, and civil defense vehicles also were at the scene. None of the injured firemen appeared to have been hurt seriously. Those who were taken to Greenpoint Hospital were Lieutenant M. P. Vose of Water Tower 6, Lieutenant Joseph Hoffman of Hook and Ladder 115, Fireman Sylvian Garbarino of Hook and Ladder 131, and Fireman Woodard Summers of Engine 210. The collapse of the building made it unlikely that the body of the watchman could be recovered last night. His daughter, Mrs. Florence Radzicki of 193 Collier Street, Brooklyn, had made a vain attempt to save him. Mrs. Radzicki was in her parents' second-floor flat across the street on Manhattan Avenue when her father left to go into the warehouse. 10 minutes later, she said, she and her mother, Mrs. Bertha Roble, heard him calling for help. They looked out of the window and saw smoke coming from the building. Mrs. Radzicki rushed downstairs and tried to get into the warehouse, but she could not open the wide metal doors. She then ran into a restaurant near her home and asked for help. Nobody would venture into the flaming building. 9 workers lucky to escape. The 9 workers who were in the warehouse were lucky to escape. 5 of them were carpenters who were engaged in converting the building into a factory. The others were digging an inside well to supply water for a hydraulic elevator for the building. One of the well diggers smelled smoke, came out of the hole, saw cartons burning, and one of the carpenters running from the place. The well digger summoned his companions, and they, too, fled. For several hours it was feared that the well diggers had perished in the fire. In mid-afternoon, Fire Marshal Martin Scott called their employer S. J. Breen of 114-37 Bedell Street, Springfield, Queens, and learned that they had reported to their home office unhurt. In addition to the 7 tenements and the warehouse, the other buildings damaged were the Edwards Hotel, 76 Clay Street, Siphon Paper Company, 31 Clay Street, Bonder Glass Company, 58 Clay Street, Judd Valve Company, 19-27 Clay Street, Jeshwind Foam Rubber Company, 70 Commercial Street, and 2 tenements at 1115 and 1117 Manhattan Avenue. Only the roofs of the tenements on Manhattan Avenue were burned. The one at 1117 housed the Gospel Sowers Church on its first floor. Fire Commissioner Jacob Grumet and Fire Chief Peter Loftus, who were at the scene, were apprehensive lest the flames spread to other industrial sites in the area, which included lumber yards and a sugar refinery. Firemen were able to keep these places from igniting. Warehouse valued at $500,000. Casper Citron, president of the Surrey Holding Corporation, 1119 Manhattan Avenue, which owns the warehouse, estimated its value at approximately $500,000. He said the mechanics were to have started work yesterday on the installation of a fire sprinkler system. Mr. Citron is currently on leave from his concern and is serving as regional director of the Small Defense Plants Administration for the metropolitan area. Buildings and human beings were not the only ones to suffer from the fire. Fire hose melted, and several automobiles parked in the street near the flaming buildings were burned beyond further use.